I will now introduce Ina. Ina Coveney is a business coach. She helps online coaches monetize their existing network through natural and organic lead generation techniques. She hosts a great podcast called the Global Phenomenon Podcast. She's got the signage in the back. Good for you. And she's interviewed some of the brightest minds in the online world. You should definitely check it out. And I don't want to take up any more of Ina's time. So, Ina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Dave, for that gracious welcome.
It was all right. Actually, I forgot to say, it wasn't perfect though, because I forgot to say during Ina's talk, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, or this is a small, intimate group. Feel free to just kind of shout them out along the way. I may interrupt her a couple of times myself, but I'm going to try to stop right now. Okay.
Thanks. I'll prepare myself for the interruptions. No, seriously, I'm really, really happy to be here talking to you guys. I have been podcasting since 2012. I'm a dinosaur in podcasting years, and this is my latest one. Is interviewing people basically who are celebrating what I do, which is online coaching. That's my space. But I would love to welcome your questions, like Dave said, and you can just start if you. As soon as you think about it, put it in the chat so that I'll read it and I'll find a good space to introduce that topic. I just want to make sure that by the end of this, you have a better idea for how to create a community around your podcast. Like we all know, podcasting, it's kind of a bummer that it's just like a one-way communication here, right? There's no way to chat with our audience through the podcasting app. So it's incumbent on us to figure out a way to actually find out who our ideal listeners are, where are they hanging out, let them know who we are, and let them hang out with us, right? So that's where the building community comes in. And since we're all in the online world, we are going to be talking about social media today and how to build communities online. So my specialty is in turning a small audience into clients, right? It's in combing through the audience that you already have to turn them into leads, to warm them up and becoming clients. So I would love, I got an introduction from all of you, but I really want to know who of you have just a podcast, but you're not selling anything behind it. I want to make sure I can see everybody's faces. So Diana is not selling anything behind it. Everybody else has pretty much a business that you are advertising, right? Or Chris is like,
He's still working on his podcast.
I'm agnostic.
You have the business, but not the podcast yet.
Exactly. I have the business, but not the podcast. Exactly.
Okay. So I am going to be talking, you're going to hear me references as your ideal clients, essentially, because that's really what we would love. We would love to be able to become the celebrities in our niche, right? We want the people who want to buy from us to reference our work so they can refer us to other people, right? That's the authority elevation of podcasting. And that's why Chris should definitely get on that so authority can be elevated, right? Not that he isn't a big shot already, but even more so. So what I wanted to chat with you guys today was about how to use social media for this. And can you guys raise your hand if you can? And I'm sorry, actually, let me switch a view to gallery. Okay, now I can see you all. Can you guys raise your hand if you have a Facebook business page for what you do for your business / podcast? Facebook business page. Dave, I see Mike, Matt, Laura. That's it. Who has a Facebook group? Maddie has one. Mike has one. Did I see that right? It either exists or it doesn't exist, Mike. Is that a yes? Yes. Okay. Who of you have an
point of order? Maddie Blake actually has a fan page on Facebook. Maddie, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're not called fan pages anymore. They're called business pages. So you have a business page on Facebook.
Well, so I was just being wise, but Maddie's in entertainment, so maybe he's different. I don't know. But anyways, but Maddie's podcast, don't let me speak for you, Maddie, but it is an enterprise unto its own, would you say?
Yeah, it's not business really. It's an entertainment podcast, but I would love to, I wanted to hear her thoughts on just kind of, I think some of the things are translatable in terms of building an audience.
Oh, for sure.
Transferable.
Yeah. I'm not offering a product or service though. It's strictly entertainment.
Got it. So, and who has an Instagram account? Okay, I see a few of you. All right. So first I wanted to kind of describe in terms of building a community with your podcast, where is the quote unquote best place to do it, right? Like demystify that. It's like, yeah, I know you're going to want me to just cut through everything. Just let me tell you like what works so that you can go and do it, right? So here's the deal. It has a lot to do with where your natural, where you naturally gravitate towards. So is there a particular social media space that you find yourself interacting in the most? Can you guys tell me who's on Facebook the most? Matt is the only guy on Facebook in this entire group.
I guess. I'm on Facebook.
Okay, Dave, sort of. Laura, sort of. Where is everybody else? You guys can speak up. Where is
LinkedIn.
everybody else hanging out online?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay. I'm so glad I asked. Okay. So here's the deal. To create a community, the biggest thing is interaction, is engagement, is actually reaching out and talking to these people. So I'm going to start with, okay, people who just have a small audience, right? People who don't have the ability to know exactly like where that audience is or where they're hanging out. The first place that you start is wherever you normally hang out, right? So if you normally hang out on LinkedIn, I'm going to give you a little caveat. I'm going to give you a little like something that you should like know really well about, because LinkedIn is very different from Instagram and from Facebook. You're going to find every kind of person on Facebook and on Instagram. There is no such thing as your ideal client or your ideal listener is only on one social media platform. That's not a thing. Everybody's using multiples. If you want to find your audience on Facebook, you will. If you want to find it on Instagram, you will. If you want to find it on LinkedIn, you will. But there's different ways to use each one that make them very unique. I'm going to start with LinkedIn. LinkedIn, because it's, it presents itself as a professional network, people are very, very wary of what they engage with because they might not want to see their boss seeing them engage with this. They're not as open with comments as somebody would be on Instagram, where everything just gets kind of hidden. Nobody would see what I'm commenting on Instagram. It's just too vast a universe, right? On LinkedIn, people are a little bit more reserved. So I'm going to give you like 2 hot tips on how to build community on LinkedIn. Okay. Number 1, create your own group. Okay. For people to hang out in LinkedIn groups, they need to know exactly what it is that you got to offer. Okay. Otherwise, they're just going to listen to your podcast. This is a big reason why engagement on LinkedIn is just very low. People are just walking on eggshells all the time. It's not just you. It's not just your posts that are not getting engagement. 99% of people on LinkedIn will not engage with the content. And you can't really rely on the 1% that will, right? Because it's the 1% of people who are following you, like there's an even smaller percentage of people who normally would engage with content online anyway. So you can't rely on the way that you would do it on Facebook or Instagram of creating engaging posts and letting people comment and like on it. You can't rely on that. It's important.
Would you say most people, like, I wonder what percentage of actual LinkedIn posts people actually see on their feed, because I feel like there's so many posts on LinkedIn that if you log in for the first time at like 2 p.m. one day, you've missed 100 posts that you won't see. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, and that's the way every social media platform works.
I feel like Facebook does a better job of like sorting the ones when you get on, like the top ones that you're supposed to see or something. I don't know, but anyway,
that might have to do with the number of connections you have. So it's easy to have 1,000 connections on LinkedIn if you've worked in a lot of different jobs and you've gone to a lot of different schools and whatnot, whereas Facebook is more likely to be only your friends unless you're
Are you saying I don't have too many friends, Diana?
Well, I mean, it would be odd to have thousands of friends, but it wouldn't be odd to have 1,000 people.
No, you're right.
You're right. Connected to. That's all. I don't know.
That's completely contrary to my world, where everybody I know has thousands of friends on Facebook. So it's not a norm.
I actually am the one person who goes in and deletes Facebook friends religiously, like every month or so. I'm like, I have more than 500. That's creepy. I don't talk to him anymore.
Right. So most, like, the people that I deal with in my world, right? People who are putting themselves online and who want to be like personalities online, who are attracting their people online, they will use their personal profile to use it as a personality platform. So create their profile, right? If I find out about Diana Donovan from her podcast, I'm going to go and Google her. I'm going to go and find her on Facebook. I'm going to want to friend her. I'm going to see what she's up to. So if Diana only has a profile that is close off to only family and friends, it's like basically like your ideal clients are kind of like out of the loop. But it's really up to you what you where you decide to train people to find you. Okay. So if it's going to be on LinkedIn, then you set the rules for that. You can tell people in your podcast and say, by the way, you guys, if you want to engage more with me, I have a LinkedIn community. This is something that should be in every podcast episode. You train people on where to go to hang out with you. If you're not going to be using Facebook that way, then don't lead people there. You will find your ideal client everywhere. Okay, so just pick that home. So so we were talking about LinkedIn, how most people are not going to engage, and David had the question of the feed. I'm going to tell you, David may feel that way because when he looks at his feed, it's actually people that, hey, he wants to engage with, but maybe on LinkedIn he doesn't, right? But this is all subjective. You should assume that you're going to run into that problem with every platform, because there's going to be thousands of posts anyway. The question is, how does the algorithm work? The algorithm is designed to get posts that have a high engagement to bubble up. Okay, so if I just told you that it's really hard for people to get organic engagement on posts, you're most likely just going to see all the posts that go viral, right? Like the articles that go viral, the articles that have views. And Chris was just asking, it tells you the number of views. Do views matter? The only thing that matters is how many conversations you are having with your ideal client, with your ideal listener on social media. It's the only measure that matters. Getting views, sure, it's great, right? But it doesn't do anything for me or my business to get 500 views on an article, right?
I'd say that goes doubly for podcast, because you could get 300 views on a post about a new episode of your podcast, but it means nothing unless some of those 300 actually clicked on and listened to your podcast. And
exactly. So it's the same effect. So when I talk about building community, I'm not talking about gathering a whole bunch of people in a place, right? And you're like, hey, you can point at it and say, hey, that's my community. It's actually how much interaction you have with people who listen to you, and how you are going to start drawing them out. If you're going to do this on LinkedIn, which is the most of the case for all of you, I would suggest having a LinkedIn group. Again, not just to group people in there so you can point at it and say, that's my community, is to give them a special access to what you do. Okay. So if your podcast is about law, what does your ideal client, somebody who's going to hire you, what information are they looking for, right? Presumably, that's what your episodes are about, right? That's why they're clicking on it. That's why they're listening. That's why you created it, right? But if you're using this for business, tell people, hey, by the way, in the LinkedIn group, I go live every Wednesday, and you can go live on LinkedIn. I can tell you a little bit more about how to get approved for that, because right now it's by approval only, but you can go live in your group on LinkedIn and say something beefy, right? Something that you haven't covered on the podcast. So maybe it was too long to cover on the podcast or too specific to cover on the podcast, and tell them about something that you believe that people who need to hire you, if they listen to that, they would hire you on the spot. That's what you're using that for. So if I were to give you an example, like for me, I help people turn their audience into leads and into clients. So I have a group called Lead Generation for Online Coaches. If anybody's looking for lead generation, they're going to find my group, they're going to sign up and register, and in there, I can start teaching them. I can tell them, by the way, this is how you're going to be using social media to attract your audience. This is what you're going to do. And they start to see me as that expert, so that when I have something to sell, which I do through webinars, like I have a specific process for people to buy something from me, I can make that invitation. And be like, by the way, for all of you who have been listening to me for the past month talk about this and you find it fascinating, I am going to be doing a webinar next week. Come and check it out. and I'm going to be selling my services there. For law services, for any other kind of service that you do, you just need to know what your sales process is. What is that first step that people need to take to buy from you? You want to invite people to that first step, not from the podcast. These people are driving right now. These people are taking a shower right now. They don't have anything to write down a phone number with, right? So you want to lead them to a place where they're relaxing at their computer or they're searching on their phone and they're finding you. And if that's a LinkedIn group, then that's a LinkedIn group. If you mostly hang out on Facebook, create yourself a Facebook group. What I do want to point out is that the Facebook pages are not the same as a Facebook group. But I won't go down that rabbit hole unless somebody cares, because I know you guys are mostly a LinkedIn crowd. If you want, we can stay on the LinkedIn topic.
I've got one
Yeah.
question about it.
Yeah.
So because our podcast is about high school alums, really, that we're interviewing them, and they're mainly the audience. There is an existing group from our high school class, but not everybody is in it.
Facebook.
And yeah, a Facebook group. Would it make sense, because there is a little bit of sameness there, for us to use Facebook?
Who's your ideal client? Are you selling something or it's just a podcast?
Not
Really.
we just
We
wanna
don't know yet.
No,
We-
Far, were you gonna say something? No? Okay.
Who do you want to be listening to your podcast?
In the beginning, our classmates, but we hope that a wider audience of people who went to high school in the 1980s will find this interesting.
Okay. So I first of all, you should create your own group, right? Not just rely on that, because that's, even if you created that group, that's not what that group is for. There's going to be people there who could care less about a podcast about people in the 80s and just wanted to keep in touch with their friends. Mm-hmm. I'd be creating a separate group for like everyone who went high school in the 80s. You guys, that would go like viral overnight. Like if you use the right keywords, like I went to high school in the 80s, that I would be surprised if a Facebook group doesn't already exist, because I think it's a brilliant idea. And people who went to high school, they're going to want to join it to see what memorabilia you have in there, what nostalgia you can bring up in there. And you put yourself there as the authorities in this field. It's like, we are the ones who have the podcast on going to high school in the 80s, right? So you want to create that community. So you want to invite people from your group, from your classmates group, and tell them, by the way, we're going global with this. We're going to be talking to people who went to high school in the 80s, and we're going to be talking about the nostalgia and the reboots that are happening right now, and when we saw it, when all the things that you talk about, and invite those people in there. But it should be like a conscious decision. People should buy into being in that community because they want to be. So make sure you know exactly what you're offering in there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
That podcast is a little unusual because there is a Facebook group for our graduating class, and that is the podcast is born out of interviews with people in that very class. So if ever there was an existing group,
so did everybody's in that group because they wanted to be a part of the podcast?
No, because the podcast doesn't have a page yet, but there's a class of 86 Facebook page. Just
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand. Okay, so what I wanted to know if is anybody wanted to know the difference between a Facebook group and a Facebook page in terms of how you use it. Matt wants to know. Chris wants to know.
Yeah, I think it's very valuable. Please.
Okay, so here's the deal. So let's all agree right now. If you get nothing else out of this, let's all agree right now to get the lingo right. Okay, a Facebook group, a Facebook personal profile, and a Facebook business page. Okay. Whenever you say Facebook page, that should mean a business page. It's not your personal profile. It's not your group. So let's get those three separate watering holes right. Personal profile is the one where people friend you. Business page is what used to be called a fan page. All right. And you can create one for your podcast. You can create as many business pages as you want. And then there's a Facebook group, which is an actual community, and you can close it and say only people that I approve can come in. Okay. There's also the option to make it public if you would like. So these three places are treated in a very different way. Okay. First of all, let's start with a Facebook page, Facebook business page. You got to know Facebook makes their money off of ad revenue, right? Off of people buying ads. So when you create a business page, suppose that you get really, really good at getting an audience, right? Suppose that every single one of your podcast listeners, 10,000 strong, 20,000 strong, they come and like your page, okay? They're not joining your page, they're not friending your page, they're liking your page, okay? Or follow your page. It's two separate actions, like or follow your page. Facebook does not want you to be able to advertise to them for free. That interrupts their business model. So by definition, sorry?
I said Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg, okay? So Zuckerberg has a business to run. Respect him as a businessman, right?
A little.
So he doesn't want you to advertise to 20,000 people for free. Why would you need ads for, right? So whatever you post on your Facebook business page is only going to be visible by a small percentage of the people who follow you. So never assume that just because you posted it on your Facebook page, people are seeing it. Most likely, most people are not. The way that Facebook pages thrive, if there's one thing that Facebook can't get enough of, is engagement. So if you post something that is really sexy, that it's really like your ideal client can't help but share it, can't help but comment, and not just like with the little hands and with the little hands and with the hearts, right? If they comment like 3-line deep comments, right? Like they're really engaging with that post, Facebook is going to make sure that that post gets seen by more people. So if you're going to be creating a page and you want it to thrive, you should be thinking, how do I get people to engage with this post? It shouldn't just be like a notifications page where I just post that I just have a podcast and that's it. It should be something that drives engagement. Okay, that's how you use a page. It's not to build a community. It's purely to build authority and hopefully get more eyes on your stuff so you can sell it easier. Okay, but it's not about building community. Okay, in fact, they really hide in the settings where you can see who has liked your page. It's not even easy to find. That's not where you build community. Okay, your Facebook group is the place where you build community. Because I'm going to tell you right now from experience, people are very happy and very easy to click that friend button on your personal profile. Everybody wants to be your friend. But when it comes to joining a Facebook group, there's a lot more reservation. They're not going to do it as easily. They will like a Facebook page easier than they will join a Facebook group. Because when they join a group, they're saying to themselves and they think they're telling the world, even though Facebook does not advertise which groups you're a member of, that's not something people have in mind, right? But they believe that if they join it, then people are going to see that they're putting themselves in evidence as being a part of that community. It's just a bigger ask, especially if you have questions to answer, questions that people have to answer before you join. You're making them jump through hurdles to get in there. So once they get in there, right, this is why this is the most beautiful place to create an audience, because they've already shown you that they want to be there. Now it's up to you to give them the value, and you can consider them a warm audience. They know who you are because they joined because of you. Now it's time to go live every week to post engaging questions like, okay, what law problems are you having this week? Can I answer any law questions for you this week? Right? You just start creating that content for people to draw them out. It really depends on what you're selling, okay? And figuring out what your ideal client is like, what are they interested in, so you can start to draw them out with your content. And once you draw them out, don't be afraid to reach out like a human being and send them a private message and say, hello, my name is Chris and I'm a lawyer and you just engage with my post. Like, how can I help you today? Right? Be a human. Pretend that when people are warm, right? Pretend that they're in a room with you, like they can see you, they know who you are, and you're just walking up to them and be like, hi, right? So just
can I actually interrupt for a sec? Sorry. You mentioned Facebook Live, and if you haven't seen one of Ina's Facebook Live shows before, you haven't lived. But tell me, have you ever done your podcast as a Facebook Live?
I did my entire Trailblazing Out of Corporate Life podcast live. Okay. So what I would do, and I had 100 episodes on that podcast before I moved on to the Global Phenomenon. I would go live every Monday, and I would go live on my phone. So I had a tripod. I would go live on my phone. No. Yes, I'd go live on my phone, And then I would record the sound with my computer. So I had my microphone recorded through the computer, and then people could see me live through the phone. They couldn't hear me through the microphone. They just heard me through the regular phone speaker, but people don't care. It was close enough.
Right.
It's fine. But through the podcast, for the podcast, it was really high quality sound. So yes, doing your episodes live, I would do that in my group.
So we have the ability to do that for the Pod 617 members of the Pod 617 posse, that if you want to do your podcast recording as Facebook Live, you might not want to. Some people want to maybe have the comfort of knowing that it is completely pre-recorded and editable and not live, but it does give you the opportunity of having people engage with you right away. You can actually call, quote unquote, talk to people who are putting comments in the chat. And then if people don't comment, then so what? You're still just doing your podcast, right? So
you're still just doing the podcast.
Yeah.
So what's important here, though, in terms of audience building, is to not be afraid to talk to people. Like I said, don't think of your community as a pod of people who are gathering outside of you. These are people who are talking to you. Okay. And before I move on to the next one, I'm just gonna take a look at the questions. I had a question from Diana. What is the goal of getting your...
No, go ahead. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Diana was asking, what is the goal of getting your listeners to engage? Is it to continue the conversation that your podcast might start, or is it to grow your audience or to monetize? It's to be able to turn them into clients. So Diana, for you, engaging with your audience is just going to make them bigger fans. Okay. So for people who have a service, this is a very important, engaging with your audience, a very important step to turn that audience into clients. You're not going to just turn them into clients by putting a sales page between you and say like, okay, just, if you want something, go to this website. You got to talk to people. If you're not planning on selling anything, engaging with your audience is going to give you really valuable feedback on the podcast. So first of all, I would love to be personally in touch with the host of every podcast that I listen to, because that would be amazing, right? Like for me, it's an honor, it's a privilege, it's like exciting to be talking to Diana. Oh my gosh, she's asking me how the podcast is going. Let me tell her what I thought about the last episode. So when you hear podcasters say, well, our audience is saying this, that's how they find out. Okay. I would not be like sending out surveys and things like that unless you have a mailing list over 10,000 people, right? Forget about surveys. Talk to people, ask them these questions and get that feedback. So that's the value of engaging. Does that answer your question, Diana?
Yeah, it does. And the reason I asked it is just because it seems like another thing to have to manage. And if it may not be something we need, that's why I asked, but thank you for answer.
But in part of what Ina said, it occurred to me that something you could do in your podcast, Diana and Farah, is once it launches, which it's going to launch very soon, when those comments come up, you collect those comments and then give those people a shout out on the next recording of the podcast. So, I take it you would give your stamp of approval to that, because I tell people
you might have even learned it from Ina.
I do. I learn lots of things from him. But if you I tell our hosts this all the time, and Laura, and if you're still on the line, and others have done it, but at the beginning of the podcast, if you take, even if it's just 30 to 60 seconds to say, hey, we just want to give a shout out to, Stan in Shrewsbury, who said he really liked the show about this and that. Maddie, are you still on the Are you still on the call? Yeah, Maddie, you're there.
Yes, yes.
I don't mean to hijack your presentation, but it is technically my meeting. But Maddie, if you could tell people about the Monster Mail thing and whether you thought that was a help.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so yeah, we did Monster Mail. Then the podcast I used to do was called Monsterland. And so we did Monster Mail, which is a way that people could leave us a message. And we did a segment in the show. I had benchmark segments in the show, one of which being Monster Mail. And I would read audience emails. And quite frankly, I got a couple of them started myself. I kind of started it myself. And, hey, what do you guys think the greatest paranormal movie of all time is? Whatever. Just wrote it myself. And then, but people started engaging, and it was a really good way to build that. Yeah.
And you used to do that. You would have like scraps of paper. You'd have like, got an email, got a Facebook post here.
Yes.
Somebody sent me a text, like
all different sources. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And to piggyback off of that, because Maddie is right on the money on that, what I started to do was getting questions from people that I was engaging with on social media and just offering to feature them as a featured question. So I started to meet more of my ideal client by offering them that little bit of publicity, right? In exchange, like, hey, can you share the podcast once your episode goes live? I'll let you know when your question goes live and you can share it. And they're so excited, like, oh my God, yes. And so I would come on the podcast and say, like, this question comes from this person, right? Like, that person didn't like spontaneously knock on my door and give me a question, right? It was me like engaging out on social media and then offering that as a bonus, and it helped. So why do you engage? If you want to make your podcast better, if you want to create a raving fan, right? Like, that's why you engage. If this is just a podcast to scratch an itch because this is fun, because this is a hobby, because this is just great for you guys to do as a project, go ahead. You don't need anybody, you don't need an audience to do that, right? But if you want to grow it in a way that is going to create like a raving fanship, and I think that your title, your podcast about going to high school in the 80s is like money. It's like, that's a sexy topic. It has the potential to blow up. I'd be engaging with people to see what is it that they want to listen to, what is it that they like, and see what you can do about featuring them and increase that engagement. That's just that would be good business for sure.
Chris has a question. You see that, towards the bottom of the chat.
Okay. Laura left. Hi, Laura. Okay, Chris said, when you blast on Facebook Live, is that only to your group or from your page? It depends. I want you to think of your Facebook group as having a warm audience and your Facebook page as having a cold audience. Also, you understand that the Facebook page is not going to be seen by a lot of people, right? While the Facebook group, as long as you can keep engagement going and invite people in conversations, is going to be seen by more people. Okay. So it depends on what you want to do, what you're going to talk about. If you're going to be giving like law advice to your warm audience and have a call to action at the end to say, by the way, I am doing an info session on how to work with me tomorrow. You should come and check it out, right? You want the topic to be really juicy and really relevant to what you're going to be selling, to what, the services that you provide, so that people watch it for the purposes of watching your pitch, so that they can see you say, by the way, come tomorrow. We're going to do an info session on this, right? So the content, the type of content that you create has to have a purpose. And the purpose is to get you clients on the other end. So whatever you talk about has to be something that they want, and it has to be related to your offer. If you're going to do it on your Facebook page, I would say for a cold audience, they're not going to care about you. They're going to care about the content. So I wouldn't go live for more than 5 minutes on a Facebook page. And I would just give them a really good gold nugget that is directly related to what you offer. I'd be like, by the way, you guys, my name is Chris Brontes, and I am an expert at this. And I just wanted you to know that if you're thinking about this, you should be doing that. And this is why. Okay. I'll see you on the next one. I'll be back next week. Or by the way, come and join the Facebook group because I do a lot more stuff in there. Goodbye. It's a cold audience. They're going to care more about the content than about you.
And
warm audiences will care about you.
Can I ask a quick question about, you mentioned content, and for us, content, I think, has to be very, very specific. There's no such thing as saying, okay, let's talk about law.
Right.
What you want to say, let's talk about regulatory risks related to the PPP program, or let's talk about the risk of undue foreign influence in academic research programs. And so they're very specific audiences, and they're very specific topics. And so how would you approach that? Because it's a wild range of different things that we want to be talking to. The audiences will be very different for each one. How do you deal with something like that?
What is the main service that you want your podcast listeners to buy from you?
It's their legal services.
It has to do with every one of those specific topics. So in Chris's example, he's a labor lawyer, so it'll have to do with employment law and employment risks and all that kind of stuff. The case of the regulatory enforcement and so forth, it's white collar lawyers, it's investigations, corporate investigations, both external and internal. It could be, there's another one could have to do with transactions, about issues related to private equity transactions and so forth. So they're like totally different worlds that we're talking about, each one of them. What do you suggest?
For social media, it's very important that your audience that is listening to you, they are all grouped based on their interests. So if you have 3 different offers, and I'm here thinking like, okay, you help people who are lawyers, and you help people who are regulators, and you help people who are like individual citizens. I like, if to start off, I would pick one kind of audience to create a community around. Ideally, you would eventually have a community for each one of those pods.
Okay.
But if I'm an individual and I need law help, and you can provide it, but that's not all you do, I don't want to be stuck in a Facebook group where you're going to be talking about things that I don't care about because I'm not a corporate lawyer. So
Completely agree with that. Yeah.
so the communities that you create have to have like interests. It's not about you, it's about them.
And so for the time being, and I'm sorry, I don't want to hijack this, but for the time being, what we've been doing is we have targeted lists for each one of these, and we've been relying more on our own direct outreach than on social media to get this done. And does that make sense? Or
yes, I mean,
okay.
All you have to do is engagement. Social media is just a tool, just like a mailing list is a tool, just like going to networking events is a tool. As long as you're keeping that like person-to-person interaction, it doesn't matter how you do it. If you want more of it, you might want to expand to social media. You might want to expand to more in-person events. But as long as they're all giving you in-person interaction, that's what you need.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Matt Plain, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to chime in because I struggled with the same thing as Dave. Our podcast, The Legal Lowdown, and we have a bunch of lawyers with different specialties, and we try to get everybody involved so we're being fair to all the practice areas. And so we might have 3 in a row about new federal legislation that impacts employment. And then you're like, okay, we haven't given any love to the trust and estates lawyers, so let's get them on. And we found that it was going well, and we're getting dozens of people to listen to them, including all of our adult children and parents and family members. But we didn't get a good following. And that's why I've been workshopping this idea of having subsets. So because we represent a lot of schools in the school choice movement, and we have lawyers from Massachusetts to Maryland in that practice area, and we could get a better following there. That we got the internal politics, obviously, of something like that, because then the regulatory compliance people, it's no fair. What are you giving to me? But that's neither here nor there. But I hear Dave when he's saying them, like, yeah, that's kind of what we're. And then you have the different lists and the different client constant contact things you send them out on, and it's going fine, but it's not creating that buzz around it.
And
Here's the thing, if I can say something, Matt, because your words are very telling. It's the lawyers that are like, well, you're not giving me, okay, I have to be fair to the lawyers. It sounds to me like the customer for your podcast is the lawyers that you feature and not your audience. And that's why you're not building a following, because a following gets built not because you want it to, but because they want something from you. So if you're not giving them consistently what they want, they're gonna go someplace else to get it.
Yeah, you have to come to my next partners meeting. That's all.
Okay.
Don't subject her to that.
Chris, were you going to say something? No.
I think it builds off what has just been said by Matt, and I don't. Lawyers in particular, people don't care about what we do. They care about what they do, and so we need to talk about what the audience does, and not about what I do. Because if I was to say Title VII was passed in 1964, and it's like, oh my God, I don't care. I really don't care. And if we talked about even a new case that came out, the Supreme Court makes it, that might be interesting, but ultimately, I think the idea of the school choice thing, Matt, you're talking about something that you're talking about the people who are listening and their interest in school choice. And that's why, David, you like the idea of law at work, which I kind of like because it was about me. It's what I do. And I'm actually thinking about when we do this to come up with something about a title that's more about what our clients do.
Well, that's yeah, and you're onto something there. I think. I mean, I met with a firm downtown that wanted to do one, and they represent real estate developers in Boston, and so I said, "What do you want your podcast to be about?" They said, "We real estate law, I guess." And I said, "Well, why not make it about real estate? Why not call it like the skyline and have your clients come in and tell stories about how Boston's skyline was built?" I would want to listen to that. And then it's about them. And then meanwhile, your guests are kind of getting a solid from it. But just to jump back one sec, I'm curious your thoughts on this, Ina, because the in a perfect world, like Dave and Matt, you would have more than one podcast. You know, you would have it by topics, but we don't live in a perfect world. So sometimes, and your podcast, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you know, from episode to episode, your audience will change because you're going to bring in followers of your guest. When you have, you know, I tell people all the time, it's an obvious point, try to get people on your show that have big social media followings, because the idea is they come for the guest, but they'll come back because the podcast is so good. Diana and Farah had a nationally known pediatrician on. Now, I guarantee you, the medical community is going to be interested in what Shin had to say, right? I mean, his classmates are too. And like Maddie, when you had someone on from The Curse of Oak Island, which is Maddie's on that TV show, by the way. Well, Drilling Down, the post show. Anyway, but Maddie, that there was like it was an overlap in audience, right? Like there was the Oak Island audience, but then there was your podcast audience, and I don't know. So, you know, maybe there's no answer to this question other than to build your community as best you can. But you know what I'm saying, right? Episode to episode.
I think so. Here's where things really work is it doesn't matter who you have on the podcast. You as the host are responsible for the experience of your audience member, right? So, for example, I've had people on the show, you know, they're all online coaches, right? They have one flavor, right? Like they're all online coaches, but they're different. Some talk about Instagram, and some have a specialty in PR and all that stuff. But I know that my audience has heard about every single one of these people because I'm basically interviewing micro celebrities in my niche. And I care about my audience being people who are going to see me as an awesome celebrity too, so that they work with me. So everything I do in this podcast is about, does my audience care about this? And if it takes editing, I've edited a podcast episode down from 50 minutes to 15 just to give my audience what they need, right? It's all about the audience. And if my audience is not going to find value in this interview, I am not going to release it. It's not about featuring people. And I'm not paying anybody any favors. I am here running a business and helping my audience get what they need and be able to come and buy from me, right? There is a goal to the podcast. So if I had Matt's podcast, right? And I'm like, well, I'm featuring different kinds of lawyers each time, I'd be wondering, who is my audience for this? And right now it seems like, no, my customer is really the lawyers who want to be featured. Like basically you're running a free marketing service for lawyers. You're not putting out content for a community of people. You're giving lawyers a space to speak their mind, and then they can take that and put it on their website, basically. Like you're just providing a marketing service for them. So that if you start doing that like outside your practice, right? I'd be charging for this. That would be your business. I'll interview you on whatever you want, and you can take that file and use it for your marketing purposes. But at that point, you don't care about the audience, because your audience is those lawyers. It's just having a purpose for it. And to go back to what Dave was saying about, in an ideal world, you would have multiple podcasts for it. You know, what we do in my world is we work off of basically like promotional periods, right? Like if I have 3 different offers, they're not all going to be for the same person, right? Because I work with people who are in different stages in business. So I know that one person is ready to pay me $25,000 for coaching, but one person is just willing to pay me the $30 for my little bundle, right? So I have different offers for different audiences. If I were to have a podcast that wants to speak to each one, I'd probably do seasons. I'd do 3 seasons a year, where the first season is all about that kind of audience, helping them start with their business. And then I would have a mid-year season where it's all about getting the next stage, right? Okay, you've made money. Here's how you really take it to the next level. And then a final one, okay, you guys are about to listen to the advanced version, right? But it's all essentially the same audience. For you, if you wanted to do something like this, it doesn't hurt to have themes and play with themes. But when you're grouping people in a community, I would keep them separate, because I don't care about being in the same room as a corporate lawyer, and we're not going to care about hearing the same things from you. So I think you have that flexibility to treat your podcast as, hey, it's okay to have one season that appeals to me, and it will be back next year, and I'll listen to it next year, right? Because the next season I don't care about. That's fine. It's totally cool. In my community, I'm only going to group with people that are like me.
How many episodes do you need for a season? Because we
As
did
many-
we did
as
a
many
4
as-
series.
Yeah.
We did a series of 4 on a particular topic, protecting assets from
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah.
And it was, it was interesting, and we got pretty good response to it and everything. But I was just curious, is 4 enough, or do you need?
It's anything you want it to be. What matters is that the audience is prepared for it. So you tell them this is a 4-episode mini series on
Okay.
this, and we will be back next time. We're going to talk about this other thing. So when you advertise it and you start to call an audience to listen to it, you're going to be doing it to specific communities, not just to everybody who follows you, because not everybody's going to care. It's like,
Right.
hey, you guys, I did this series just for you. Come and check it out. We have a Facebook group to discuss it, and hire me.
Got it.
I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you.
I thought it was. This may be apropos of nothing, but what is your call to action on your podcast, Ina? At the end of your show, what do you tell your listeners to do?
I tell my listeners to ask me a question on my website, which I will answer on the podcast. That was for the first season. So that's where I was, I would do the answer people's questions, and then I would tell them, like, now go and ask me a question. Because when they ask me a question, it gets them into my mailing list. Okay. So this is all like feeding my.
So you don't even care if they subscribe to your podcast necessarily.
I assume that because they're listening to it, they know enough to do that. I think I may hit, I do, no, I'm lying, because I do say at the end.
You can say both.
I do say at the end, by the way, next time I'm going to be talking to this person and you don't want to miss it. So click subscribe. And by the way, iTunes is changing their lingo. It's not called subscribe anymore. It's going to be called follow. So you're going to have to say that in your podcast. Subscribe or follow in your favorite app. But yeah, I do say that. I do say that at the end. Make sure to hit follow so that you can see the next person. Yeah. I do have questions here in the chat, just really, really fast.
No, I think you answered them all.
No, there was one. Okay, Chris, when you share to your group, does the world see it, or does it only the group see it? Depending on your settings, Chris. So there are 2 privacy settings on a group. It's, can people find it, which is your visibility, and can people find it, and can anybody join? It's like the privacy setting. So you keep a Facebook group visible so that people can find it, but private so that people on the outside can't see who is a member or the posts that are inside. So it's 2 visibility settings. You could totally have it completely hidden. So that's a different setting than the privacy. So it's visible, not visible, or private and public. So I would have it as visible and private.
By the way, I'm going to get everybody out of here by 20 past at the latest, because I have to get my son dinner, and he gets cranky if he doesn't get his Panda Express. So
and I heard my 3-year-old already. He's already screaming downstairs. I know there's a stampede of boys running up the stairs any minute.
Well, that'll be entertaining. Good podcast material. Do you have a few more minutes of material, or do you just want to do questions now? Your call.
And I'm happy to do questions. I wanted, like, my point of this whole thing is that if you want to create a community, you got to engage with your people. So group them someplace it makes sense, and reach out and ask them questions. Hey, I'm Maddie. I just want to see what you're up to and what you thought about the last episode. Okay, just talk to them, especially for people who have businesses. Talk to your people. You're going to develop a little bit of a litmus test of what questions to ask to know if they're your ideal client or not. Ask them those questions, but just reach out and start those conversations is invaluable. Even if you don't have a call to action for that conversation, just starting that is going to make them more aware of what you're posting. And it's just magical. Talk to people. That's my big message today.
In general, do you find certain social platforms are better for promoting podcasts than others? Not really. I mean,
the thing I'm just gonna tell you is that to us, what we consider promoting is just, posting like, hey, come check out my podcast. Here's, my episode is live. Go check it out. All people are people in every social media platform. So they're all gonna react the same way to that call to action. What matters is which social media platform is more conducive to you creating a community and reaching out to people. LinkedIn is the one that you're going to see the least engagement. And so you have to train your people on how to engage with you on LinkedIn. Facebook and Instagram, people are a little bit more open at talking and commenting and things like that. So they're good places to start those conversations. So really, the answer to your question is none. What matters is the engagement.
And I'm sorry, if others have questions, just raise your hand or jump in. I have a couple more, but so you go ahead, Maddie, you go.
Yeah, I have a question. I loved what you said. I never thought about this because I have my Oak Island fans, and I feel like I've bled from them enough into this paranormal podcast I do. Like they've come over, and but there are tons of paranormal podcasts out there. There are tons of film review podcasts out there, but I couldn't find any that do paranormal film review, especially from two people in the business like he and I are.
Nice.
So like when you said, I went to high school in the 80s as a Facebook group, but have kind of your podcast as running that page. I think that's brilliant. So we could do, and I don't mean to turn this to a brainstorm session, but I love what you said, could we do, I love paranormal movies or something, a group like that. And you're saying that right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you're living proof of this because like a year after I launched Pod 617, I saw somebody else started a Facebook page called Podcasting in Boston. And I was like, wait a minute. That's mine. What? And it was, so tell me why you did that, Ina, because this is actually brilliant. Yeah, go ahead.
So here's what happened. I didn't mean to step into Dave's turf at all, but here's what happened. So I have a business. I'm an online coach, and I was trying to think creative ways to find my ideal client. And because I've been podcasting for a while, this is something that was just really front of mind. I realized that a lot of my ideal clients, they want to start a podcast. I know as the expert in online coaching that shouldn't be your first step if you want to start a coaching business. I know that, but most of my people who are starting don't. They just gravitate towards the action. Like, should I start a YouTube channel? Should I start a podcast? What should I start to get my name out there? That's not the first step to start a process, but that's what they think. So I thought, I am extremely capable to teach podcasting, and I can make it, very entertaining, and I can make it really fun. So I just want to attract people who want to learn about podcasting, who know nothing about podcasting, because that's the exact spot that my ideal client was in, right? They don't know anything about it. They think it might be a thing. So I went and I registered the domain podcastingclassesinboston.com. I created a Facebook page called Podcasting Classes in Boston, and I started advertising, I'm teaching podcasting. So I got into a deal with Staples. They loved the energy of the class. They started having me there more and more in Staples locations before the pandemic started. And I started teaching these introductory classes, and I got clients from this that never, to this day, have never started a podcast. Because I get to teach them now, like, hey, this is how you start a podcast. But by the way, if a business is what you want to start, this is not where I would start. I would start in this other place, come and work with me. And that's how I started to get clients. So it was purely a lead generation activity.
Oh, is that not a bait and switch?
No, they got a class. They learned. Our class was, we recorded, edited, and published a real podcast episode right in the class. So
it's true.
They got what they purchased.
For the same reason why, Maddie, I think you're spot on. I love paranormal movies. It's going to attract a lot more people than Rated R for Paranormal, because Rated R for Paranormal, it's that extra step. It's like, well, what is this thing? I don't know what this, what, so.
Well, yeah, it's like we got the audience based on my audience. We got the audience based on Tony's audience and his level of fame, and he was on the Americans and all that. But I feel like we've done that. But I just know there are so many people that listen to film podcasts, and so many people listen to horror film and paranormal film podcasts. And it's like, how can we get them to find us who
Yeah.
didn't know us before, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh
something
my
like
God.
that.
And I can already picture like your content machine would be amazing. It would just basically be pouring out like paranormal activity from movies. Oh my God, that would be an amazing experience.
Excellent.
Yeah, by the way, Maddie isn't sitting in a darkened room. It's just darkness follows Maddie around. So it's
true.
just, yeah.
It's true. Be careful what doors you open, everybody.
Yeah. It's very branded, correct brand right there. His all look.
You mentioned that in so many words, you said something that I just heard an industry person say almost verbatim, and that is ultimately you need to be not bashful enough, to use a double negative. You need to be proud enough to be the star of your own podcast. You can't expect the star to be somebody else on every episode, right? You said something like that, I think, right? People are going to. You said I'm not featuring somebody else. I'm featuring me.
Right? What I meant is that what matters is what the audience wants. I'm not here doing anybody any favors, right? So like if I interview Dave and it's a terrible interview, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't subject my audience to that, right? Like that's my point. My point is the audience is king, not the guest.
Well, I'll ask the question anyway. When you're interviewing someone, how would you describe your interviewing style? Is there an amount of time that you should be speaking versus your guest, and how does that all go?
My philosophy is that in whatever conversation we have, it can't, like you mentioned, like it can't be all about the guest. Because yes, I'm selling something, right? Like if I weren't selling anything, then my voice wouldn't matter, but it does. So I need everybody who listens to the podcast to understand that I'm an expert at this, that I know what I'm talking. I don't just interview people, I know my stuff. So to me, it's important that number one, I know what the point of my interview is. And my interviews are about finding out their real initial startup story that nobody else is asking them about. I treat them like celebrities, right? Nobody else is asking Selena Sue like how she ran into entrepreneurship, right? Like in detail. What was your childhood like, right? What did you go to college for? What were your co-workers like? Nobody's asking them that. So I know that that's the hook for my podcast, right? So know what the hook for your podcast is. What makes it different from every other podcast out there, okay? And do that thing and do it consistently, number one. Number two, I do interject with my own stories and my own expertise, and I do agree with what they say and add to it. There are times that my side stories don't make it on the podcast because, again, the audience wins. This is not really like the Ina show. It's about the audience. So if I went too long on a story, I censor myself. I do cut my part out, but it manages to help the guest kind of get more comfortable and respond to my story. So there's usually a point to it in the conversation, but it's whatever the audience is going to hear. So there isn't really a balance. I would say strive for a good conversation, right? Don't strive for being the, interviewing someone on 60 Minutes. I would strive for making banter, of finding common ground, of listening to their previous podcast episodes. And if there's something that they always say, right? Like if they have a script, get them off the script. I had a guest one time that I listened to enough of her podcast episodes, of her interviews, that I noticed that she was telling exactly the same story over and over.
Oh, God.
And well, I mean, that's what people do, right? Like if I were interviewing, I'm going to tell the same story over and over. So how do I keep them on their feet, right? How do I like make it different? So what I did was I took her words out of her mouth. It's almost like I gave people like the snippet of what she was about to say so that the next things out of her mouth can be, okay, then, and what? What does that mean? So that we can go deeper from that and we don't spend the next 10 minutes regurgitating something she said everywhere else. So she used to tell the story of her grandparents are from Hong Kong and the only words they knew were husband and doctor, right? So that's why, that's all she thought about. That's why she went to med school and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, how do I get her off of that script? So I started the interview with, through my research, I found that your grandparents were blah, 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 and they only knew these 2 words. So what did that mean to you, and how did that affect your life? So we can start the conversation in a different spot than where everybody else is starting, right? So, and the conversation can go for as long as it's useful. Like I said, I've had 50-minute conversations that I cut down to 15 minutes. It's all about making sure that every minute has value.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I tell people that all the time. They need, this is just what podcasts have become. They're conversations. It's the reason why we come back to them. It's, you know, a radio producer once told me, great talk radio is just like listening in on somebody else's natural conversation. So scripted is horrible. And, you know, Diana, I think you'd agree, some of the guests that you've had, you ended up going down roads you didn't think you were necessarily going to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, they didn't come into the podcast with expectations. It was like, oh, we'll just talk about whatever. And that's exactly what happened, is you went like all over the place, which is really makes it fun.
Yeah. I think it makes it a lot more fun, which is why, now Matt Plain, do you have guests on your pod, or is it our colleagues?
Yeah, we have guests and colleagues, but guests as well.
And how would you describe your style as compared to what we've mentioned so far?
We give them the questions in advance.
Should you?
I think because we've been talking about how Matt should really be monetizing the fact that he's a marketing, there's a word for it, conduit, right? That's what he is. He's a marketing platform for these lawyers. I think it's totally fair for him to not be the star. They are. That's what makes these interviews marketable, that it doesn't matter who's interviewing. It's like they get to talk about themselves and then take that, and I'll be selling that, Matt.
Yeah, no, you know, I don't disagree. I was just talking about the interviewing style of giving. I don't like it when a guest asks me for the questions ahead of time. I usually say, no, I don't have any questions. We're going to talk about what you do.
It changes the conversation, because if you get them in advance, you really need to be on message. Whereas if you're just chit-chatting, but that makes sense for something, we're all high school classmates who haven't seen each other. So it's really easy for us to spin off and be informal. That doesn't work for everybody.
It's true. And the law podcast will be undoubtedly more about fundamental stuff. And if you're a guest, you would probably want to know what you're going to be talking about. I get you there, but Matt Plain, one more question has it been easy for you to do this, or is it always you on the pod, or is it
it's not always me?
Okay.
I kind of help design it, and then we have somebody internally that's always the host. But I'm frequently on it, which I think makes it clunky, because then we have our internal person as a host, me, and then a guest. And then we have her asking both of us questions. And I think that's why I wanted to redirect, or at least spin off something, because this one got a little bit, the idea is good, and it's been great to sit on our website. It's good for SEO and all those things. But I want to kind of bring it around to the audience, and not just about the folks that are on it. So
if you think 3 is bad, you should hear the 5 voices we had on Diana's podcast. It takes some managing.
Yeah.
But
lawyers are a tough group, as you all know. And it was hard for me to not bring in a stenographer. So baby steps.
Well, yeah. And the law firms and lawyers that we work with, some are just better than others. Some are good storytellers and will go off and give an example of a case they handled that, you know, XYZ, and you get some really nice detail. Some lawyers feel like they're being interviewed by, no matter what if there's a microphone in front of them, it's like they're being interviewed by, you know, Dan Rather or someone, and they have to answer in these canned answers because they want to be media friendly. And, but you know, with a little bit of coaching, I think you'll find, and Dave and Alyssa, you probably know this, that some lawyers are going to jump to do this. I mean, Chris is almost jumping right now. I mean, look at him looking right into that Zoom camera. But Chris happens to be a natural. I've had him on my show a couple of times, but others, they freeze up, right?
And
Dave,
one of the challenges we do have, since they are lawyers, they want to plan. They want to understand what they're going to be talking about in advance. And so it's one of our challenges has been to try and help them knock it back to a conversation, make it more, a couple of people who know a lot about something who are kind of just riffing on it or sharing it with each other. So.
Very good. So we're up against the clock here, as we say in the podcast business. Ina, I want to give you a chance to let people know where they can get in touch with you if they'd like to follow up with you on any of the stuff you talked about.
Well, thank you guys. This has been fun. What did you guys find this session helpful? Was this good? Yes, worth our time. Awesome. That was great. No, thank you guys. Well, I can be found on Instagram, but you can find me on LinkedIn too. I'm there too. I do corporate parties too. So if anybody wants to pick my brain, I do have a rate, so we can always talk offline. Dave has my email, and you can find me there. Also, for anybody who would find this interesting, I'm teaching a class. It's for coaches. It's for online coaches with small audiences who want to monetize their audience. So for anybody who wants to learn about what is it that I'm talking about, the stages of online business and how to turn audience into leads, into clients, I'm teaching a class for that next week. And I gave the link today, but it's basically at theglobalphenomenon.com/pod617. I gave Dave his own link. That's the link to this class that I'm teaching next week. And it is for online coaches. So if you guys have any bigger needs or anything that you guys want to talk about offline, it's probably better to set up a meeting than to go to one of these classes. But I thought I'd give you both options. But this has been great, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thank you. I will send a follow-up email to everyone just with some information about Ina and a reminder about, these meetings happen every month. Each one, I want to have a little bit of a different flavor. This was all about audience on a different show. Everything's a show. On a different call, we might talk about, how to begin a podcast, intro music, and how to find good guests and all that stuff. But I thank you all for coming. I know we're all zoomed out, so I'm going to get you out of here.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ina.
Thank you, guys.
Outro music is playing. It means it's time to go. Remember, in Pod we trust. Love you, Maddie.
Love you, buddy.